WordPress Accessibility Day 2023. Mobile Accessibility. Building accessible mobile sites and native apps for accessibility. With speaker Gian Wild, CEO, Accessibility Oz. This presentation was recorded September 28th, 2023.
Welcome to WordPress Accessibility 2023. My name is Samyukta and I am Accessibility Consultant from India. Thank you for joining us for mobile accessibility, building accessible mobile sites and native apps for accessibility with Gian Wild. Little bit about Gian Wild. She is the CEO, founder, and president of Accessibility OZ, established in Australia in 2011 and the United States in 2015. Gian has worked in the accessibility industry since 1998. She worked on the first AAA accessible website in Australia and developed one of the first automated accessibility testing tool, that is Purple Cop, in 2000. She spent 6 years on the web content accessibility guideline group, that is from W3C, contributing to the development of WCAG 2, WCAG 2, and is currently a member of the automated WCAG monitoring group. And Gian is the higher education content steering group for accessibility switchboard, as well as a committee member of the ICT Accessibility Testing Synopsis conference in United States. Gian speaks at both web and accessibility conference around the world. In 2017, she was nominated as the Australia of the Year, and in 2019, she won the inaugural Accessibility Person of the Year in Australia. Please feel free to add your questions in the Zoom Q&A section, and we will answer them at the end of the section. Use the chat to connect with your attendees. Over to you, Gian.
Thank you very much. So first off, thank you so much for coming, and please bear with my Australian accent. I have heard it's quite strong. One of the things that I'd just like to say is this URL is usually where you can get all the details of the slides and any links that I might mention. But for some reason, the people that run this system let the pz.tt URL lapse. So I'm putting the actual full URL into the chat, and I'll do so at the end as well. And we can maybe send that out to, I'll put it on the Slack channel as well. So thank you very much for having me. The very first thing I'd like to do is acknowledge the Yugara people as the traditional owners of this land. I live up near the Gold Coast, in one of the mountains around the Gold Coast, and it was very well known as an Indigenous homeland. Once again, you can access the presentation and the links not on that URL, but on the URL that I put in the chat. So first off, I'd like to introduce you to our team. This is our team in 2018, which is like 5 years ago now. It's a long time ago. And we have changed a little, but one of the things that I want to just emphasize is that, you know, we don't look disabled, any of us. And yet at that point, 60% of my staff had some kind of significant disability that affected their daily life. I actually actively hire people with disabilities. We are an accessibility consultancy run by people with disabilities for people with disabilities. I've had staff with a whole range of different disabilities, including dyslexia, moderate vision impairment, severe vision impairment, epilepsy, migraines, physical impairment, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, PTSD, autism, and unfortunately, long COVID. And one of the things that I would like to point out is that it's not just about vision impairments. So a lot of people, when they're new, especially to accessibility, think it's just about screen reader accessibility, and that is absolutely not the case. So that's the point I wanted to make. Just a little bit about me, just so you'll, maybe take what I have to say seriously. As the introduction said, I started in 98. I worked on the first accessible website in Australia. I like to say I started when I was 5 years old, but that's not actually the case. I'm not going to tell you how old or young I was when I started in accessibility. And so, yeah, I created Australia's first automated accessibility testing tool, was an invited expert to the W3C WCAG 2 working group. I worked on the 2006 Commonwealth Games. In fact, I've worked on all the Commonwealth Games since then, including the Victoria Commonwealth Games that just got cancelled. So that was fun. I spent 6 years managing usability and accessibility services at Monash University, and then founded Accessibility Oz. We released AusPlayer, our accessible video player, and then AusArt, our automated accessibility testing tool. And then I spoke at the United Nations on the importance of web accessibility, and was nominated for the Australian of the Year and inducted into the Centre for Accessibility's Hall of Fame as Accessibility Person of the Year in 2019. But the important thing that I've been doing since about 2018 is actually working on mobile accessibility guidelines. So let's talk about that. So a little background. Hi, Ricky. It's great to see other Australians on the call. So why did we develop a mobile accessibility guidelines? So basically, to explain that, I need to explain about the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium, which was run every year or so before COVID just messed everything up. And it's aimed at accessibility testers. And at the end of the symposium, we have a town hall where we talk about what it is that we as a community need, as an industry need. And one of the things that was talked about in 2017 was the fact that there was really no standard advice on testing mobile or testing accessibility on mobile devices, that all the different companies had their own guidelines that they followed, and they weren't really necessarily similar in any way. And so we formed a committee, of which I was a chair, to amalgamate all these mobile accessibility testing standards. And, we hoped that would be a one and done, because we knew WCAG 2.1 was being released in 2018. And we thought, excellent, WCAG 2.1 is going to address all these issues, but here's something that we can use in the meantime. So let's talk about WCAG 2.1. So before we talk about WCAG 2.1, we need to talk about WCAG 2. So WCAG 2 success criteria are applicable to mobile. So you do need to, make sure all your images have alt attributes when you, go to a mobile site, or, make sure all your images have alternatives or names and etc. if you're creating a native app. But not all aspects of mobile accessibility are specifically covered by WCAG 2. So, for example, although WCAG 2 requires sites to be accessible to the keyboard user, it does not specify that it should also be accessible to the touchscreen user. So that's just one area where it fell short when it came to mobile accessibility. And of course, WCAG 2.1 does build on this and addresses more criteria specifically around touchscreens, pointer gestures, etc., sensors, small screen devices, but it really doesn't cover all the user needs related to mobile accessibility. So what we did as a group at the town hall in 2018, we sort of, as a group, decided that we were not happy with WCAG 2.1 and that we still needed some mobile accessibility guidelines. So we reconvened the committee. We actually split it into two committees. We had one for a mobile site testing guidelines and a native app testing guidelines. And I was co-chair on both those sets of guidelines. And so we spent a bit over a year working on them, and we released them in early 2020, just before COVID. I promise you the two are not related. So that's basically what I'm talking about now. So this methodology that I'll talk to you about does not include those errors already in WCAG 2. So it doesn't say, hey, your images need alternatives, but it does include those errors in WCAG 2.1. So like, hey, your site needs to be responsive, because we knew that there would be some organisations whose standard was WCAG 2, but they still wanted to meet mobile accessibility. So we didn't want them to miss out on anything, but it's very clear in the guidelines if we're referring to WCAG 2.1. And then when we were including all those WCAG 2.1 things, we as a committee found that there were some areas that we didn't agree with the W3C. So it's a little bit different And we do spell that out in a lot of detail when it comes to the guidelines themselves. So I keep talking about these guidelines. You can find them on our website. I'm just going to put the URL in the chat. And basically, let me just open it. It looks like this. Oh, it doesn't. It looks like that. It looks like this. So you've got your introduction, so it explains why we've got that. Note on WCAG 2.1, mobile sites versus native apps, hybrid native apps, and the two methodologies. So you've got your mobile site methodology overview and your native app testing methodology overview. And so each testing methodology has 5 documents associated with it. So the first one is the methodology itself. So think of that as, your WCAG 2, no associated documentation, just these are the rules. And then you got your about section. So your about document has things like devices, assistive technologies, site types, variations of the page, capturing errors, which is especially useful in native apps. So a lot of kind of general useful advice. And then you've got basically 3 methodology documents, one on critical test cases, one on standard test cases, and one on test cases for assistive technologies and mobile features. And so these are very big, complex documents. You can see 90 megabytes. We are working on making them into a website, but we all have lots of things to do. So that's where you get them. So let's talk about mobile issues. Why is mobile actually different? Well, mobile has a bunch of accessibility features that you don't see in desktop. So one of them is the native screen readers. So yes, you can get screen readers on desktop, but and when I talk about desktop, I mean PC as well as Mac. But they're not native, so people have to purchase them or choose to download them. Yes, there are some native ones like VoiceOver on Mac, but not so much with Windows. Whereas when it comes to mobile devices, you have native screen readers and you really only have 2 screen readers that you need to worry about. TalkBack with Android and VoiceOver on iOS. Samsung, of course, has created its own, and you've got a different one on Amazon, Kindle and things like that, but those are the 2 main screen readers you need to worry about. Then there are things like volume control, haptic keyboard, visual, auditory, and vibrational notifications, screen rotation, mono audio, voice control, increased text and display size, reduction of motion, zoom, and reader view, simplified view. Now, the interesting thing about all of these is they're fairly easy to access, and you'll find that there'll be a number of people who actually use these assistive technologies who would not identify as being someone with a disability. So, for example, my stepmother's getting a little bit older and she doesn't read books anymore, novels anymore, because the text is too small. She reads everything on her phone because she has figured out on her own accord, I did not show her, how to increase the text size, and so she reads it all on her phone. And that's something that we find that users find these options much more so on mobile devices than they do on desktops. Another thing to be aware of is page variations. So as part of WCAG 2, you have to test for anything zooming to 200%. So you need to make sure that if you increase your text size or you zoom to 200%, that everything should still work. However, this has actually created a bit of a problem since we've introduced these mobile devices, because low vision users who use the zoom function inherent in the browser often end up getting restricted to a mobile view of the site on their desktop, as opposed to just making everything larger. So therefore, it's essential that functionality is not removed due to a variation in the page. Now, what do I mean by that? This is an example. It's an old example. It's just a very, very good one. They have fixed this, but this is YouTube. So this is the YouTube website from like 2018. And you can see in the top right-hand corner, you have your upload and your notifications button. But if you, on the desktop, increase the size, so just go Control plus until it hits 200%, you'll find those things disappear. Now, why do they disappear? They disappear because whoever's coded the back end thinks, okay, if you're looking at it at this size, you're actually looking at it on a mobile device. So we don't want you to upload videos on the mobile browser. We want you to download the app to upload videos. But of course, someone who has low vision and who has just increased the, zoom on the desktop is not going to be able to upload videos. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. So you need to make sure that whatever you see on one version or variation of the page is available on all other variations of the page. And you can hide them in certain ways behind accordions and things like that, but it still needs to be all there. Another thing that's really important when it comes to mobile is the concept of accessibility supported. So this is a WCAG 2 concept, which basically says that implementation techniques that support assistive technology used on mobile devices such as TalkBack, VoiceOver, and switch control are supported. So basically what this means is that when you come to testing, especially with native apps, but also when it comes to mobile sites, you must test with assistive technologies that are on the devices. And I'll talk about those assistive technologies later, but it's absolutely essential that you actually do that testing. And so if someone's a pure, say, WCAG 2 tester, they can often get away without actually doing any testing with assistive technologies. But as soon as you're looking at a mobile device, you have to really do that testing. And I was always a purist. I was always someone who said the only person who should really be testing with an assistive technology is someone who uses it every day, because, I can see the screen, so I know I have an expectation of what it is that I'm going to hear. So, for example, when we did some testing a while back, we found that a lot of screen reader users didn't understand the Go button next to the search bar. So you'd have a search bar in the top right-hand corner. It often wouldn't be labeled. And then you'd have a button that said Go. And visual users would look at it and go, oh, yeah, it's just a search bar, and you hit Go. So even if they were testing with a screen reader, they wouldn't find any problem with it. Hey, it's a search field or it's a field, but it's got a label through the button called Go. Whereas the screen reader users would be like, what does Go mean? Where are we going? So it's really important, I believe, to test with users of assistive technologies. And so as an organisation, we still follow that through when it comes to screen readers, but it really isn't possible to get a native switch user and a native keyboard user, et cetera, et cetera. So, and it really does mean when it comes to mobile testing that you have to start learning these assistive technologies yourself. So let's talk about testing methods. So there are 4 main testing methods in mobile testing, so mobile site testing. So testing on the devices, so mobile and tablet devices, testing on the devices with assistive technology, testing on mobile and tablet devices with assistive technologies, responsive windows, so testing on a desktop with a responsively sized window. And if you're like, I have no idea what she's talking about, then look at the documentation. It goes into it in a lot of detail. And testing on desktop. Now, when it comes to native apps, there are only 2 main testing methods: testing on devices and testing on devices with assistive technologies. We strongly recommend, did I mention strongly, recommend that you do not use simulators. You need to use actual devices, ones that you hold in your hand, because simulators are not very good at actually simulating. And they might be okay if you're just looking at a website or a native app, but as soon as you bring in those assistive technologies, it all goes out the window. So you absolutely need to have real actual devices. Now, this is just an example to show you why you need to have a real actual device. So this is a really old example. This is from 2014, back before there was Wi-Fi on aeroplanes. And, we'd land, the flight from Australia to the US is about 14, 15 hours, just a really long time. It's a really long time without internet as well. And so one of the things is we'd land on and would sit on the tarmac for an hour or 2 waiting for a gate to become available, because often, because of the winds and things, they wouldn't know exactly when a flight would land. And the wonderful thing is that when you're sitting in the tarmac of LA, you used to be able to access the LAX Wi-Fi. However, this is what it says. When you actually put in the details to log in, it says this page will redirect. So content doesn't really make sense to have here. Now, how does that happen? That happens because someone used a simulator. That's happened because someone was testing on desktop, not an actual device, not in an actual location. So these are the things, and I have a whole bunch of examples like this. If you're interested, there's, and I'll put it in the chat at the end, there's a video from around that time, 2014, 15, 16, called Mobile Accessibility, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is just all of these examples. So this is why you absolutely have to test with real devices. There's such an important thing to me that my 2 dogs have gotten up from sleeping to kind of find out if I'm okay, because they're like, oh my God, she's really worried about something. Okay, so let's talk about the methodologies. Both methodologies have 5 steps, and these actual specific requirements under each steps would change, but 4 of the steps are the same, and step 2 is the one that is different. So when it comes to mobile site testing, step 1 is identify devices. Step 2, identify site type and variations. Step 3, test critical issues. Step 4, test mobile specific issues. And step 5, test mobile assistive technology and feature support. With native app, the steps are all named the same, except for step 2, which is define application functionality. So step 1, identify devices. So one thing to remember is that in the United States and Australia and other Western countries, iOS devices tend to be the most popular. However, in Asia and other Eastern countries, Android devices tend to be the most popular. So to best find the devices you really want to focus on, definitely look at that Google Analytics or other analytics systems that you might have. But that's just a general guide. Be aware that due to the popularity of the Android system, there are tens of thousands of Android operating system and browser combinations available. It's absolutely not possible to test on all of those systems. So the best thing to do when you're testing a mobile site on an Android phone is to download Chrome. Now, Samsung comes packaged with what they call an internet browser app. Don't test with that, because that will show you exactly what the errors you're likely to find on a Samsung phone with the internet browser. It's a much better representation if you download Chrome and test with that. Be aware that even if the site is a desktop site, people will still use that desktop site on mobile. iOS has this funky little feature, which is if you don't like what you're seeing, it says show desktop site. So you need to test the desktop site on mobile. You need to test the mobile site on desktop. It's a whole big thing. It's got lots and lots of testing. It's unfortunate, but that's the way you have to go. The other thing to remember is that there are assistive technologies that work across desktop and mobile devices. Like there's this thing called VoiceOver, which is a screen reader. However, if you tested a site with VoiceOver on Mac, that is not the same as testing it with VoiceOver on iOS, that you will get completely different results. So those two are not the same. And it is interesting to have a look at the latest WebAIM screen reader survey, which shows you kind of usage and things like that. But really, VoiceOver and TalkBack are what you need to look at. Yes, there are additional screen readers like Voice Assistant in the Samsung, but TalkBack is still available, and people who really use their screen readers day in, day out are more likely use TalkBack. Amazon Fire also has a different screen reader called VoiceView. These are things that you only need to worry about if your analytics are saying, hey, 90% of our mobile users are Samsung users, or if you've got something that will end up being shown on an Amazon Fire. So what we recommend is that you test on an iPhone, if it's a mobile site with Safari, on an iPad, if it's a mobile site Safari, and an Android phone, if it's a mobile site with Chrome. Now, it's important to test with an iPhone and an iPad because they're actually different operating systems. And also the expectation, even though you need to test with both orientations, is that an iPhone you see portrait and an Android you tend to see landscape. So it is important to test with both of those. Now, other devices to consider are things like the Android tablet and Chrome, and alternative devices such as a Kindle device if you know people are going to use them. We recommend testing on the latest version of iOS and iPadOS and testing on the latest 2 versions of Android, but really you can get away with testing on just the latest version of Android. When a site is directly aimed at people with a particular kind of disability, consider including assistive tech devices and technologies used by potential users. So if you have a site about acquired brain injuries, for example, then you want to have users that are reliant on speech recognition technologies like Dragon, naturally speaking, people who are native users of those technologies. And I didn't mention this before, which I know I did, you need to meet WCAG 2 and this mobile testing methodology. So you can't just follow the mobile testing methodology and think your mobile stuff is going to be accessible. You have to meet WCAG 2 as well. So step 2 for a mobile site is identify site type and variations of the page. So the first thing to do is determine if the site is a desktop, MDOT or responsive website. And if the site is a responsive, are there variations of a page? So a desktop website is one that has only one display, whether viewed on desktop or mobile or tablet device. MDOT sites have a particular display and it's actually a completely different website for mobile and tablet sites. And you actually end up having 2 websites. You have your MDOT site and your www site, and you have to test your MDOT site on desktop and on mobile, and your www site on desktop and mobile. And responsive websites, which change depending on the screen size or other feature determined by the developer. And in fact, in the methodology, we say that responsive websites can only change due to screen size, not spoofing, not determining if it's a iOS or whatever. If you're like, I have no idea what she's talking about, once again, all these things are in the documentation in lots of detail, how you can identify these things, step-by-step instructions, etc. So step 2 for native apps is define application functionality. So through your understanding of the purpose of the native app, define which functionality is critical to its purpose and use, and it must be tested for efficacy, operability, and workflow from a user experience perspective. So what do we mean by that? Let's think about, say, a company like Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo has a website, and Wells Fargo's website will have information like its share price, how to apply for jobs, how to make a complaint, how to get a home loan, how to purchase shares, maybe. It has a whole lot of information. However, Wells Fargo probably only has one native app, and it's probably about how you bank with Wells Fargo. So it has a lot less information and it's much more streamlined when it comes to native apps, which is why you have to test differently or identify the sections that you need to test differently. So ask the question, how would the experience be impacted if the functionality failed, the content could not be reached, and or the experience caused a barrier to the user? And then, of course, all functionality should be accessible within the native app. However, it is important to define and include the critical functionality for each individual app to be prioritised in testing. And then there are common elements to test, things like navigation, landing screens, emergency sections, login flows, settings, accounts and profiles, contact us, real-time updates, privacy policy terms and conditions, interactional functionality, help section, widgets, calendars, etc., geolocational maps, and high traffic areas. And then step 3 is test critical issues. So step 3, we are all about what we call traps. So new features on mobile devices, of course, means new traps. And so a trap is where a user is trapped within a component and cannot escape without closing the browser or the app. So that there is a very well-known trap on desktop, and it's called the keyboard trap. You tab into something like a video player in Firefox in 2009, and you can't tab out. You can't tab backwards out, you can't tab forwards out. The only way to get out of the video player is to close the browser and start again. And that's actually why we built OzPlayer. So that's the only non-trap back then when it came to desktop. However, there are many more traps on mobile sites, and we have identified 5 of them: the exit trap, the swipe scroll trap, the text to speech trap, the headset trap, and the layer trap. So we're going to go through these now. So the exit trap, ensure there is always an accessible, actionable item, e.g. a close button that meets color contrast requirements and has an accessible name, that closes any feature that overlays the current page, such as a full page ad. This applies to all users, and the methodology is mobile site and native app. So this is an example here. Excuse me. The URL at the top, dailydot.com, is not editable. The back button does not work for some reason. And the only way to actually get rid of this ad, which overlays the entire page, is to somehow scroll that very small area at the bottom, which is impossible to access. And if you scroll on the actual ad itself, you will actually activate the ad and end up purchasing an HP Elite Book Folio. This is another example, which of course we have all come across, which is a pop-up, wants to advertise something, usually when you first go to a website, and the close button is just impossible in some way, shape or form. In this example, it doesn't meet the color contrast requirements and touch target size requirements, but sometimes it's, white on, light grey. Sometimes the close button isn't really there. We've seen these all before. They're really dark UX patterns as opposed to, I suppose, accessibility issues, but they cause accessibility issues. So these are things that we have identified as traps. Then there is the swipe scroll trap. So ensure you do not override standard mobile touch functions, swiping, scrolling, etc., on the majority of the page. So this applies to touch users, and the methodology is both mobile site and native app. Now, this is an old example. It's one of the very first examples from my mobile, when I started talking about mobile accessibility. I call it the Zoom of Doom. And basically, if you scroll anywhere on the map, it scrolls the map. If you want to scroll up and down the rest of the page, because this is just a map on a page, it's not just a map, it's a map which has content above it and below it. You have to somehow scroll these small areas of white. And then we have a text-to-speech trap. If the app has an ability to provide content via text-to-speech, the screen reader user must be able to pause or stop the app speaking in a simple manner, e.g. by performing a swipe on the screen. So this applies to screen reader users, and it's the native app. However, we are seeing it on mobile sites now too. This is an example here, which is Pocket. Basically, you can play an article, but if you want to stop the article from playing, you have to tab through the page again and get to the pause button, which of course is very difficult if you're a screen reader user, because your screen reader is talking over the actual articles being spoken. So basically it's impossible to do. So it's another thing to watch out for. Then we have the headset trap. So headset users must always be able to pause media, audio or video content by using the pause play control on the headset. So this is screen reader users and headset users, and it's both methodologies. And so this is an example here. You go to a website and a video pops up in the bottom corner because, why not? And if you're a visual user, you can actually, and a video has audio, by the way. If you're a visual user, you can tap on the mute button and it will mute that video. But if you're a screen reader user, you have the same issue as before. You have to somehow find that mute button while your screen reader is talking to you and while the video is speaking to you as well. And lastly, we have a layer trap. The user should not be trapped on non-visible layers. So this applies to all users, mostly encountered though by screen reader users and sometimes keyboard users, and it's both methodologies. So this is an example here where if you open the menu, the user is stuck on the page underneath the menu. So if you're a keyboard user, you're tabbing on the page underneath the menu. If you're a screen reader user, you can only hear the content underneath the menu. So that's a layer trap. And step 4 is test mobile and its specific issues. And there are specific categories in step 4. So alternatives, display, actionable items, navigational aids, audio and video, forms, and for mobile sites only, there is mobile and desktop interaction. So let's see an example from the document. This example is touch gestures. So the rule is any touch gesture must have an alternative, accessible, actionable item. And for more information, see Success Criterion 2.5.1 pointer gestures. This is very similar to an existing WCAG 2.1 criterion. So what is a touch gesture? Touch gesture is swiping up and down or left and right, dragging up and down or left and right, double tapping, tap and hold, tap and swipe, 2-pinch zoom, and press and long hold. An example of an alternative accessible gesture is a link, a button, a drop down, or a separate page with the same functionality. So, what is it about this requirement? Why do we have this requirement? This requirement is particularly important for screen reader users. For example, if you require your user to swipe right to complete a purchase, when the screen reader is on, the swipe right gesture moves you to the next focusable item and doesn't complete the purchase. You must be able to perform the same action by using a link, an up or down swipe, or some other gesture. Please note this requirement is similar to the exit trap requirement. A failure of the exit trap requirement is that a user cannot escape from content or a page. A failure of the touch gestures requirement is that the user cannot choose content or a page, i.e. they are not trapped. So how to test? Each one of our requirements has a how to test section, some more detailed than others. This one's fairly straightforward. So identify any site controls. If they require any of the following gestures, is there an accessible actionable item provided as an alternative? So these touch gestures are swiping up and down or left and right, or dragging up and down or left and right, double tapping or 2-pinch zoom, tap and hold or tap and swipe, and press and long hold. So let's see some examples, and these examples are in the documents as well. So you can really see what it is that we mean. So this is an example where the alternative is provided on another page. So you can see there's 2 rows of content under top stories, and you can see that there is more content available on swipe because the images are cut off. And this is a very common way of indicating that there is additional information if you swipe from right to left. But there is also a link at the bottom that says see more. And that same content, when you activate that link, is shown in a linear fashion on one page if you go to that see more page. This is another example here. So this is the Google weather. And when you view the weather on Google, you can select and drag the slider to determine the weather at a certain time during the day. However, those times, the 7 a.m., 7:30, et cetera, they are also links. So you can actually get a general idea by tapping instead of dragging as well. And step 5 is mobile assistive technology and feature support. So make sure that all actionable items and content can be accessed and activated by the following assistive technologies or when the following feature is enabled. So these are the assistive technologies and features that we recommend that you test with the guidelines as they are now. For Android, that is talkback, keyboard, keyboard and switch, magnification, remove animations, invert colors, grayscale, increase display size, increase text size with Chrome, and simplified view on Chrome. For iPhone and also iPad, it's voiceover, keyboard and switch, zoom, reduce motion, invert colors, grayscale, and reader view on mobile site only. And as I said, you need to test those things on iPad as well. So I'm just going to show you an example of a voiceover error that you could find. So the requirement, once again, is all actionable items and content can be accessed and activated by VoiceOver on iOS. So be aware that VoiceOver users include, as you would expect, blind users, but also low vision users, and also users with cognitive and learning difficulties. So it's not just about people who can't see the screen. So this is a very common error. You can see, I don't know whoever put this example into the, into the methodology, the Article 30 warning signs that you're dealing with someone evil. Anyway, at the top of that, you can actually share on various different social media networks, Facebook, Twitter, the much preferred logo, previous logo, YouTube and Pinterest, but they don't have accessible names. So basically, VoiceOver reads it as link, 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 link. Another example here, a bit more complex, is basically activation doesn't move focus to the next logical item. So you've got this crossword app, and when TalkBack, this is a TalkBack issue, not VoiceOver, is focused on an across clue, when you press enter on that clue, you'd expect it to take you to that area on the crossword so that you could fill it in. But instead, when you activate the clue, it just swaps it from an across clue to a down clue. So you can see it just changes. So there's no real way to move between the two. So it's a bit more of a complex error. What's next? Okay, so updates from WCAG 2.2, whenever they get released. I must admit, I actually have not checked 2.2 since I last ran this presentation in June. So I apologize if these are incorrect, because they do change, it seems. But there are 2 additional level A success criteria in 2.2, which is 3.26.6, consistent help, providing consistent help mechanisms, 3.3.9, redundant entry, information previously entered is auto-populated. From double A, the updates are 2.4.12, focus not obscured. The current keyboard focus is not hidden. 2.5.7, dragging movements. Dragging has an accessible alternative. 2.5.8, target size minimum. Targets have an adequate size. 3.3.7, accessible authentication, providing easy methods of authentication. And for AAA, there are 3 additional criteria. 2.4.12, focus not obscured, enhanced. The entire keyboard focus is visible. 2.4.13, focus appearance, ensuring the keyboard focus indicator is visible to all. And 3.3.8, accessible authentication enhanced, providing easy methods of authentication. There's also some additional assistive technologies and mobile features. So voice control is actually fantastic for testing. But that's something that also, so voice control is great for testing if things have alternatives, but it's also something that needs to be tested with. The increased text size font color from reader view also needs to be included, and testing with a mouse, because now you can add a mouse to things like an iPad. We also need to review existing test cases. So the text-to-speech traps, for example, were only in the native app methodology. However, now they've begun to occur on mobile sites. We need to remove some assistive technologies and mobile features. So certain types of tests seem to generate the same results. So grayscale in iOS and Android, color inversion in Android, and invert colors in iOS always fail together or pass together. So you only really need to test one of those things. Reduce motion on iOS and remove animations in Android always fail together or pass together. And classic invert doesn't tend to provide any additional testing information to smart invert. And the next thing we need to do is create an online resource. So currently these are Word documents, but of course it would be better to be a website, which is easily searchable, easily updated, more likely to be used, and more accessible. I'll invite anyone who disagrees with me on that. And so we are talking about reconvening the committee. I have been talking about this for a while, but we're working on it as quickly as we can, just as we are with the captions. It's something that, I have to run a business at the same time. So if you are interested in getting involved, though, please do email us, because we'll put your details in, into a big document, and then we'll contact you when we do reconvene the committee. If you feel like you don't know enough about mobile, trust me, if you're in this presentation, you know enough about mobile. We didn't know very much about mobile until we did this. Now we know lots because we had to research it all. We had to figure it all out. So if you're interested, please join us. Thank you for coming today. We don't have any time to talk about our other products, but we have a whole bunch of free products on the website, so please check them out. And as I said, you can access this presentation not from that URL, but from this URL. And, the actual guidelines are available here. So now I will get to questions. Amber Hines says, given the differences in accessibility for mobile apps and websites, what do you think the line is for deciding if something should be built as a web app versus a mobile app? Are there certain features that would necessitate one versus the other? It's a really great question. I think actually, and I don't know if this is an accessibility thing or not, but I actually think that you need to be very careful about creating a native app because it's something that people have to download. So, I can imagine for a banking or for insurance or for reading books or something very specific like that, people are willing to download a native app. But if they just want to purchase something from you or they just want to log in once to access what you have, they probably don't want to actually download a native app. So that's from a kind of usability perspective. From an accessibility perspective, HTML is so much more accessible than anything else. And there are problems really with making things that, really fully accessible in a native app on iOS and Android at the same time. So without creating different apps, it's just, it's just all complicated. So I'd say from an accessibility perspective, a web app is usually much more accessible, but if that's not suiting you, then that doesn't suit you. And I think that we've come far enough that native apps can be pretty accessible. Anonymous attendee asked, here comes the dreaded budget question. How can we persuade lower budget clients that they should test with all devices? That's an excellent question. If I knew the answer to that, I would be wealthier than I am. Which indicates that I'm wealthier. I don't really feel that I am. But anyway, that's off topic. Basically, I would suggest that what we tend to do is we say, we'll test with WCAG 2, and then there is this additional cost if you want us to test with mobile devices. And then they say, oh, well, why should we test with mobile devices? And we can say, well, how many people on your site, use a mobile device to check it? And they'll look at their analytics and go, oh my gosh, 50% of our, users are on mobile devices. We need to test with them. So that's perhaps probably the best option that I could give you. Anonymous attendee, swiping and dragging are really confusing with me. With success criterion 2.5, wouldn't a carousel pass here? Save gesture is scrolling down the screen, but would it fail the upcoming 2.5.7? Gosh, oh my Lord. I don't know the upcoming 2.5.7 by number. So basically swiping is swipe. And so that just moves from one item to the next. Whereas dragging is where you actually pick up something and then you drag it along. I think that's probably not a very good explanation. But anonymous attendee, if you want to email me, I know you will no longer be anonymous, or message me on Slack, I'll look into that in more detail and I will answer you. And if I find it really interesting, I might even write an article and then you can continue to be anonymous. Johan Sales, I hope I pronounced your first name correctly, might be off topic, but I want to know your thoughts on where do we start in having a PWA version of people with disabilities. PWA, what's PWA? Does anyone know what PWA is? Oh, progressive web app. Thank you, everyone. I have no idea. That's really, I hate to end on a question that I can't answer, but, I think that it's something that is up to the WordPress community. And yeah, and unfortunately, it's probably going to be something that you know, it's the WordPress kind of has the problem that a lot of organizations have, which is where you are reliant on volunteers. So it can be very difficult. So I apologize that I did not answer that. Anyone else got any questions?
Probably you might have answered most of the questions, Gian, and thank you so much for your valuable inputs. And it is a great session with examples you have given, right? So it's a great session. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gian. And thank you for attending the session with Gian. And you can continue with the conversation in the chat or the social media using #WP11Y day and #WPAD 2023. We also appreciate if you go to 2023.wpaccessibility.day/feedback to provide anonymous feedback to our speakers on their presentation, and you can enter to win a t-shirt while you are there. And stay tuned for the next talk, that is Beyond Visible, crafting inclusive WordPress events for those with invisible illness and chronic disabilities, by Bridget Ozan at 7 UTC. Don't forget to visit our sponsor page to get virtual swags and enter for a chance to win great prizes. See you right after the break.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2023 sponsors. Platinum sponsor, Equalize Digital. Equalize Digital's Accessibility Checker plugin is an automated accessibility scanning tool that helps WordPress websites become and stay accessible. Platinum sponsor, Gravity Forms. Gravity Forms is the professional form builder that you need to create beautiful, powerful, and accessible forms. Gold sponsors, 20i, DQ, Empire Caption Solutions, Pressable, and WP Engine. Silver sponsors, CodeGeek, Drake Cooper, GoDaddy, Lone Rock Point, NerdPress, Overnight Website by Kinetic Iris, Riola Networks, A11Y Collective, and The Blogsmith. Bronze sponsors, Accessicart, Green Geeks Web Hosting, Hall Analysis SEO Consulting, HDC, ITX, IvyCat, MetaBox, Pixel Chefs, Simply Schedule Appointments, SiteGround, Termageddon, Underrepresented in Tech, Weglot, and Yoast.